Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Mike Norvell, Florida State, rolling through fall camp. Want to dive back into some of the big storylines that we had for Florida State and take a look at some of the names that are starting to break out during the first couple fall camp practices for Florida State. And I think if you're a Florida State fan, the names that we're going to talk about over the next 10 to 12 minutes, these were a lot of names that we were looking for to kind of have breakout performances during fall camp. I think largely what you're hearing from Florida State throughout fall camp probably makes you feel pretty good about what this team's going to be in 2024. Fired up to get into this one. Before we do, and as always, massive shout out to the Florida State fans. It's no secret the boys love talking this program. You guys continue to show a ton of love, a ton of support. We can't thank you guys enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Much more importantly, if you're listening to fall camp updates, I'm sure you have some names that are standing out to you guys as well. Would love to hear some names in the comments section. And without further ado, let's get into what I think is probably the biggest storyline for this Florida State team heading into 2024. That was the linebacker position. It really was one of our only biggest question marks about this Florida State depth chart. If you're a Florida State fan, you have to be fired up about what you're hearing about Cam Riley, which it kind of a fascinating late addition for Florida State. We talked about him when he committed to Florida State. This is a guy that's played a lot of football in the SEC, right? Over 950 snaps during his career, over 120 tackles. Cam Riley was not some sort of just late reserve a guy that hasn't played a lot of football. He has. But I think what's even more exciting about Cam Riley is we kind of always felt like there was another gear for Cam Riley to reach. And from what you're hearing out of fall camp, with the more opportunity that he's having within Florida State, he might be reaching kind of that gear heading into 2024. You look at Cam Riley, 6'5 plus. He's 230 pounds plus. This is a long, athletic linebacker that can do a lot of different things, kind of that modern college football linebacker that a lot of programs are looking for. But I think more importantly, he kind of blends with DJ Lundy exceptionally well, where you look at DJ Lundy, you make no mistake about it, one of the best run-defending linebackers that we see across the country. Now, is DJ Lundy the best linebacker to operate in space? Probably not. With the emergence of Cam Riley at 6'5", with the range that he has, I think DJ Lundy and Cam Riley kind of present a really good linebacker duo that kind of balance each other out really effectively. And to have Cam Riley kind of step up to that linebacker 2 position, I think it's a massive storyline for Florida State because you get a good version of Cam Riley, DJ Lundy, Cam Riley. You feel really good about what you have there. And then again, not to kind of count out guys like Justin Cryer, Blake Nicholson. It sounds like Sean Murphy starting to put it together. You have some other names that, we're excited about, but it sounds like we're pretty comfortable with what our starting linebackers are going to be for Florida State in the 2024 season, which again was the biggest question mark we had for Florida State's depth chart heading into fall camp. The second breakout player that I want to note is defensive lineman Daniel Lyons, who, we kind of talked about in the 2023 season. You saw the flashes from Daniel Lyons as a redshirt freshman. You didn't really see the consistency. It sounds like he's putting it together during fall camp going into year 3. That's normally when we see guys like Daniel Lyons put it together. You might need a year or 2 to kind of get physically ready to play Power 4 football along the line of scrimmage. If Daniel Lyons kind of breaks out and becomes a real contributor for Florida State, I think that's a massive storyline where, again, you look at Darrell Jackson Jr., Joshua Farmer, we ain't got no questions about what Florida State's starting with your 2 starting interior defensive linemen. I think the question marks we had was, all right, who's going to be in the 2 and 3 deep? Do we have guys that we can trust? You went out and got Grady Kelly from Colorado State. You feel pretty good about him. We kind of pegged Daniel Lyons as that guy to keep an eye on. It sounds like he's taking that step going into year 3. You talk about Daniel Lyons emerging. I think some of those question marks about the depth on the inside of the Florida State defensive line might get mitigated a little bit heading into 2024. You kick back to the secondary. Probably the least surprising thing we'll hear out of fall camp. This secondary appears to be really, really dang good. AZ Thomas, Malik Benson battling it out. we didn't have any question marks about the Florida State secondary. It's nice to hear that the Florida State secondary is playing some good football. Now, you go to the offensive side of the football. I think the name that I want to, shout out, and maybe a guy that I just have been a little bit sleeping on going into fall camp, that's tight end Kyle Morlock. This was a tight end we were really excited about 12 months ago heading into his first season with Florida State. Why I want to shout out Kyle Morlock? One, sounds to be a leader within this Florida State offense, a guy that's not only been with the program now going into year 2, but has played a lot of college football during his career. But I think more importantly, you look historically back at DJU and who he likes to go after. He likes to go after the tight ends, right? Going back to Clemson in 2022, guys like Jake Bringenstool and Davis Allen, but going back to Oregon State in 2023, the leading touchdown receiver for Oregon State was Jack Vallon, a tight end. I mean, DJU likes to work the middle of the field to these tight ends, and you look at Kyle Morlock and say, could be an all-ACC caliber tight end. If he puts it together and DJU and Kyle Morlock develop a little bit of chemistry with that quarterback tight end position, I think that's kind of a fascinating storyline for Florida State fans. You're hearing some good things about true freshman Landon Thomas as well. I think that's a guy that we're excited about. But to hear about redshirt senior Kyle Morlock putting it together, that's probably one of the bigger storylines that I'm having out of fall camp. You look at the offensive line, it finally feels like this Florida State offensive line is deep. You look at Keandre Jones, a guy that might not even start for Florida State, having a good fall camp, getting it going in the run game. You look at Florida State and where their struggles might have been on the offensive line over the last couple of years, and you make no mistake about it, Florida State got significantly better on the offensive line over the last couple of years, but when they've had to go into their depth, that's when you start having the question marks emerge. I look at Florida State and say, not only do we feel pretty good about the projected starting 5, I mean, having a guy like Keandre Jones who can kind of play a couple of different positions on the offensive line emerge as probably that 6th man that can give you some really good reps. I think that's a massive storyline. And the transfer Jacob Rizzi coming from Cornell, I think that's also another one, or from the Ivy League. I don't think it's from Cornell. You guys can check me on that. Jacob Rizzi now kicking inside, played a lot of tackle at the Ivy League. That's another name that you've seen pop up in terms of fall camp storylines. Mike Norvell has given him some love. If you're a Florida State fan, I think one of the other takeaways that you have is, all right, we're starting to feel a little bit deep on the offensive line, which again was a problem last year when they had some injuries. They had to shuffle the board. That's when Florida State started to struggle. I think the last thing you want to talk about on the offensive side of the football is how the wide receiver room is kind of shaking out. And again, I think the biggest storyline is Malik Benson is going to be wide receiver 1 for this Florida State offense. That's massive. Got to give the Florida State fans in the comment section some love. We talked about true freshman Elijah Moore as being one of those freshmen that I'm keeping an eye on. You kind of read through fall camp, and it sounds like LaWayne McCoy, Miami Central kid, is starting to emerge as a difference maker in that wide receiver room. We kind of said heading into fall camp, there's going to be some opportunity for the true freshman wide receivers to kind of crack their way into the rotation. You look at LaWayne McCoy, this was really, really clean mover, a guy that averaged over 24 yards per catch during his high school career. I like Elijah Moore in terms of the physical traits that he brings to the table, but to hear that LaWayne McCoy is continuing to make plays for Florida State as a true freshman, it makes you feel a little bit better about how this wide receiver room is shaking out as well. I think there are some really encouraging storylines. My top 3 would be: 1, we feel good or better about the off-ball linebacker spot. We feel better about the depth on the inside of the defensive line, and we feel better about the depth on the offensive line. Those were some of the big question marks we had for Florida State going into fall camp. We're getting some of those questions answered heading into the 2024 season. We'll continue to kind of update this as we get some more intel. We'll cut it there. Appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas. Again, the Florida State fans, y'all continue to show a ton of love to the boys. We appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all